All right, what is up, guys? So, huge shout out right away to my local card shop, Hawk's Nest Gaming, because they have been the most awesome place I've ever had the privilege to be able to play at. Owned by some of the nicest people you'll ever meet, and populated by some of the nicest, chillest players you'll ever meet. But they decided that every Thursday was going to be a dedicated Edison format night. So they are officially supporting Edison format, and it has a group of loyal players who either never got to play back in that era or did get to play back in that era and are just really nostalgic for it. So I am the latter, but unfortunately I wasn't very good at the game back then and didn't have access to a lot of the cards that were playable back then. So I have been just overjoyed that I finally get to sit down and play Edison format. And I have a lot of the decks for it. I have Lightsworn, I have Black Wings, I have Diva Hero, I've got Frog Monarch, which you'll be seeing here. I've got the Quick Draw Danny Warrior deck and all those different types of things. And I'm discovering through playing with the people there that there are even more strategies that I never would have even thought of before. But the deck that I really, really love, that really brings me back and gives me a lot of nostalgia, is Frog Monarch. Now, I do not actually own 3 copies of Substitute at the moment, and Substitute was recently unbanned in the current format TCG, and hopefully will be given a reprint here soon so people can actually get their hands on a copy of it. I'm hoping it'll be like an Ultra in the new Battles of Legend that's coming out soon, because not only would that be a really awesome foil reprint, but it would also put a lot of cheap copies into circulation. So this deck does not have 3 Substitute, but it does have a lot of other cool choices I've decided to put in. So let's go ahead and get right into it. There is, of course, the 3 Swap Frogs, which are pretty mandatory. It can potentially be a free summon. It Foolish Burials the Treeborn Frog into the graveyard, which is a mandatory part of this deck, which I play 2 of. And this is also a level 2 that has 1,000 attack. You can revive it with Junk Synchron to go into Cataster or go into Junk Warrior, and if you have more of these on the board, having a 3,300 or 4,300 attack Junk Warrior is not bad either for this format. And then, of course, the 1 Substitute as well, which is a crazy card. But yeah, a lot of these don't really do a whole lot just as they are right here. It's mainly just to get the Treeborn Frog into the graveyard and have access to it. And these are all basically, you know, a tribute engine for the Monarchs in this deck. So as a personal choice, I'm playing 2 Junk Synchron because being able to revive Swap Frogs and make level 5 Synchros is pretty good. Cataster is a really nice out to a lot of powerful monsters in the game, and I really like the ability that, you know, there's very few cards in this era of the card game that are normal summon a guy, get another guy. So those effects in this era are just really powerful, and we need to take advantage of those wherever we can find them. So because I don't have the 3 Substitutes, I'm playing a card that I personally really love from this era, that I played pretty much since the first ever competitive deck I made back in like 2007, and that is 3 Gravekeeper Spy. So the reason that I love this card in Monarch decks is, in my experience, and this is highly subjective, not a lot of people are playing Nobleman of Crossout. So this card does not lose to Nobleman of Crossout in game 1. Maybe side it out if your opponent is siding in Nobleman of Crossout in game 2. But this card wins combat over everything except for like Cyber Dragon. And so if your opponent runs into it with even like a Flameveil Fire Dog or a Lightsworn, like a Jane or a Gareth or a Lila or any of those other cards, this will win combat with that every single time because it has 2,000 defense. It'll summon another copy of itself from deck. Your opponent will mostly think it's a Raikou, because Raikou and Mega Hamster are all over the place in this format, and there's like almost every single deck is playing Raikou. So when they see you set something in pass, they're going to think it's a Raikou. But flipping this thing up and getting another body, and then being able to tribute one of them for a Monarch is just an insane amount of value. So she turns into a beater with, 1,200 attack that ends up going in for more damage, and then you're able to tribute for those Monarchs. And I just think it's an incredible card in this era, and people don't play around it from what I've personally seen. And even though it hard loses to Knock, people don't seem to be playing Knock. I am playing Knock because of all the Raikous, but it is in the sideboard and usually comes in if I know I'm going second in game 2. So on to the Monarchs themselves. I'm playing a lot of Monarchs, but I'm not playing Light and Darkness Dragon at the moment. I was at one point, And for right now, I'm cutting it because I don't like that it requires 2 tributes, and it does have some negative consequences. One thing that you forget is the fact that when the Light and Darkness Dragon dies and activates its effect to summon a monster back from the graveyard, it wipes your board to do it. So you could potentially lose a lot of other support cards like back row just in resolving Light and Darkness Dragon's resurrection effect. So I don't know that it's necessarily worth it for that reason. It can completely win you the game on its own, but right now I'm just not playing it. Right now I'm playing 3 Caius and 3 Ryza. These are my originals I had back in the day. Original ultra rares, and then the super rares from Force of the Breaker, plus the 1 Gold Series one. I'm also playing 1 Thestalos and 1 Mobius. Thestalos is probably the worst one in this format. The burn damage is not important, but being able to snipe a card out of your opponent's hand is pretty good when most cards that the discard from hand are few and far between in this format. So I like the Salos. I think he's pretty powerful. And the fact that your opponent has to discard a monster can still potentially get rid of things like Gores and Battle Fader and Trag before you even enter battle. So I think that he's invaluable, and I stand by this ratio right here, although you maybe can cut this one and cut a Ryza, although I think Ryza is really good. There was a scenario where not seeing exactly Caius did matter because I was up against a Lightsworn deck, and I had bought myself they had Judgment Dragon online, and I bought myself a turn by Book of Mooning the Judgment Dragon, and I had Treeborn Frog in rotation, so whatever I was going to draw for turn was going to be my out, and I drew Mobius. And so Judgment Dragon having 2600 defense actually mattered there because the only Monarch that would have answered it was Caius, because Ryza would have spun it back to the top of the deck where they would have drawn it for turn next turn and it would have been live all over again, and whereas Caius would have banished it. So Caius is definitely the overall the best one. Plus there's a lot of dark monsters you get the burn effects off of, Black Wings and that kind of thing, and even like Mystic Tomatoes and different cards like that. Banishing your opponent's Treeborn Frog is huge. Get that out of rotation. Ryza is huge as far as tempo. Spinning a back row card like a trap, like a battle trap, if it's like a Dimensional Prison or a Mirror Force back to the top of your opponent's deck, is absolutely huge. There are instances where, like I said, if it's like Dark Arm Dragon or Judgment Dragon, it is still live if you spin it back to the top of their deck. And then Mobius, I think, is indispensable because of the amount of back row that there is, especially battle traps like that. You definitely need to either force it out, or maybe you are holding like your Heavy Storm or something like that because you're worried about something like Starlight Road. Maybe this forces that out. It's hard to say, but I think that having the option to eliminate lots of back row is good. So I stand by this ratio of Monarchs, even though it is a pretty heavy representation of Monarchs there. The last monsters is 1 Gores, 1 Trag, and 1 Battle Fader. Battle Fader ends up being one of the best ones out of the 3. Obviously, Gores can win games on his own, and Trag has a really nasty effect where he can take control of one of your opponent's monsters. And there was actually a lot of games that were like Gores. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that were Trag beat down with me and my opponent each having like a Tragodia on field with a lot of attack and just kind of using him as a wall. But Battle Fader, the fact that this guarantees you another turn, there is not a single card that can respond to this. So, except for maybe like Solemn Judgment, but even then, I don't know that it would even negate the effect to negate the battle phase. So, there's no card that can respond to Battle Fader. It guarantees you another turn, and it's a body on the field, which means you can potentially tribute it for a Monarch. So, the one inclusion of Battle Fader, I think, is pretty important. And then on to the spells. So we've got 2 Soul Exchange to be able to tribute one of our opponent's monsters for a Monarch. Although we lose our battle phase in the process, we lose the ability to attack with that Monarch. We've got Creature Swap, which can give our opponent a weak Frog. And then even if we give our opponent the Treeborn Frog, it still goes back to our graveyard, which means it's still live again next turn. So I think that this card can be pretty powerful, especially if your opponent is forced to give us something like a Synchro or a larger beater. Book of Moon, I've said it before in modern format deck profiles and in GOAT format deck profiles, that Book of Moon is one of my favorite cards in the entire game. It is so incredibly versatile. It is at 3 in Edison format, just like it is in GOAT. But I'm trying to find a slot for a third copy here. I think that my current ratios are probably okay, but I'll see how I feel when I play the deck again tonight. But Book of Moon is incredible. It can be used offensively, it can be used defensively, it can be used to dodge removal, it can be used to recycle flip effects for cards like Raikou and Gravekeeper Spy. It is unbelievable the amount of things you can do with this card. And so I think that it is foolish not to run 3 of these in most decks where it's playable, which is both GOAT format, Edison format, and in a lot of cases, the modern format too. The card is seeing some play in the modern format right now, and it's been at 3 since like 2019, 2020-ish. It took that long for this card to be back at 3, and I think that that's awesome that it is. So similarly, we have Enemy Controller. Enemy Controller is really good as well, but it's like a slightly worse Book of Moon, in my opinion. But there's some crazy things you can do with Treeborn Frog in this card. So in the standby phase, Treeborn Frog comes back, but Treeborn Frog's effect is like continuous in the standby phase. As long as it can fulfill its condition to be special summoned, it will special summon itself. So you can activate this quick play enemy controller from your hand during your standby phase and tribute the Treeborn Frog to take control of one of your opponent's monsters. And the Treeborn Frog will then activate again because you're still in standby phase, and it will come back to your field again, basically making this card a change of heart, which is crazy. Other than that, it serves the same function as Book of Moon, of being something that can change the battle phase of your opponent's monsters to dodge removal or protect yourself or allow you to beat over something. And with any deck that's playing Treeborn Frog, you have to be careful about what kind of back row you run. But there's also the argument, because cards like Giant Trunade and Heavy Storm both exist in this format, that you want to play as much back row as possible that is chainable to removal. Cards like Mirror Force end up not being as good because you get no value off of them if they get destroyed by a card like, MST or Heavy Storm or something like that. Whereas a card like this or Book of Moon or some traps we'll see later like Phoenix Wing, Wing Blast, or Raigeki Break have some utility in the sense that they can be chained to removal, which is a element of picking your back row cards that's very challenging with GOAT and Edison format, and I haven't really nailed down the exact science of it yet. I think it really is format dependent and dependent what people are playing at your locals, but for this deck right now, I feel like the 2 enemy controller is correct. We have the 1 MST because it's limited at this time, the 1 Heavy Storm because it's also limited at this time, but it's not banned yet. Brain Control is really strong in this format. This is, of course, is pre-errata. And Brain Control and Mind Control are legal in this format, and there's an argument to be playing both, but you may want to put one of them in the side, so if you know you're going second, you can Mind Con an enemy monster, which would be pretty good. And the decision of whether or not you're going first or second was something that didn't matter as much back in this era of Yu-Gi-Oh! As it does in the modern era. But with the historical hindsight, we can kind of select some of our card choices with that in mind. And certain cards end up being a lot more powerful, such as Cyber Dragon, but we'll get there. And then the last spell is the 1 Pot of Avarice. I've been seeing some Edison format decks playing 2 or 3 of this, and whenever this card is live, it is extremely powerful. It is much more powerful in this format than it is in the modern format. You usually want to recur those monsters, as opposed to in the modern format, you want to keep them there, but being able to recycle like extra deck monsters, like putting Synchros back in your extra deck and drawing 2 cards, is insane. So Pot of Avarice is great in this format. I think it was banned shortly after this for quite some time until it finally came back, and now it's finally back at 3. So cool to see that. And then I do have a couple of traps. I have 1 Deep Prison because it's insanely strong. A Torrential because it's insanely strong. We got the 1 Phoenix Wing Wind Blast because, like I said, it's chainable to removal. And if I need to clear this off my back row to make a Treeborn Frog alive, I can do that. And then having the same effect as Ryza to put something on top of the deck can be a huge tempo advantage. You can even target a back row card and put it on the top of your opponent's deck. So if your opponent goes to like set, if you go first and they like attack or something and then they go to set a card, you can put that card that they set on top of their deck and make them lose tempo and know that it's not a threat to you during your turn. We've got the 1 Mirror Force, of course, because even though it does lose to back row removal, it's only chainable to an attack. It's too powerful not to run, even though it can be a victim of Starlight Road. We've got one called the Haunted and one Solemn Judgment, which I think Solemn Judgment is limited in this format. Solemn Judgment's at 3 in GOAT format, and but Solemn Judgment is still really crazy to be able to, just negate anything, especially if you already have a tempo advantage and your opponent is normal summoning a monster that threatens your board. Solemn Judgment can be really useful there. Onto the extra deck, we gotta have a little Gores token there, of course, because Gores is so essential in this format. We've got Armory Arm, we've got Cataster, we've got Junkuoria, who, like I said, I go into this guy every once in a while because I main deck the Junk Synchrons, and sometimes he can be a 33 or even 4,300 beater, so I like that. But most of this extra deck is pretty standard. Most time, if you can make a level 6, you're going into Gores or Brio. That's pretty difficult to do with this deck because we're not playing a level 2 tuner and not many level 4 monsters. But we want to have this extra deck toolbox at our disposal just in case we have the option. Let's say we brain control an opponent's monster where the levels add up really well. This card's crazy. This guy comes up a lot, ends up being almost like a game winner when he does resolve. Black Rose, of course, same thing. We've got 2 copies of Stardust because we are likely to make level 8s in this deck because of the Monarchs. Again, we just need a level 2 tuner to do it, so maybe put like a Plague Spreader in, or again, Mind Control one of our opponent's monsters, Brain Control. Red Dragon Archfiend, as you know, I'm the big Jack Atlas stan, as the kids would say, and so I love Red Dragon Archfiend, and I love all the strategies where he is playable. The best level 8 synchro in this format, other than Stardust, of course, is Colossal Fighter. And be very mindful of that Colossal Fighter Armory Arm OTK, because it can come up, although I have not seen anybody actually pull it off at my local Edison. We've got Thought Ruler as the last level 8, and then we've got, of course, Mistworm as our 1 level 9, and then our 15th card in the extra deck is the 1 Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon, so that if we side in Cyber Dragons, we can suck up our opponent's Machina board. And onto the side deck, we do exactly that. So we've got 2 Cyber Dragon in the side. I side these in if I know I'm going second in game 2 or 3, because this card is infinitely better going second and is just probably one of the best going second cards in this format, because it wins combat over anything that can be normal summoned. It can be tribute fodder itself for a Monarch, and it'll sometimes force out a lot of your opponent's interruptions. So I just think this card is incredible, and it was limited to 2, semi-limited in this format. So cards like Cyber End Dragon were not even playable, which is crazy that they would do that for like a popular anime character like that. But I guess we had moved past the GX era and into the 5Ds era, so they could get away with doing that. But yeah, I'll side this card in if I need to make Fortress Dragon against a Machina player, or if I need to just go second and have a powerful out there. We play the 1 DD Warrior Lady. This is an out to Judgment Dragon and to Archlord Christia, or anything that is difficult to remove. Maybe Elemental Hero Absolute Zero or something like that. So we put this in the side deck, and I don't think I have a Sangan. I really need a Sangan to be able to search this. But yeah, we just play this if we need an out to a particular monster like that. I've got 3 DD Crow in the side deck, one of the only hand traps in this format. It's crazy how well this card has aged. This card was originally printed in like 2007 in Strike of Neos, and was not played very much back then, and was only started seeing play in the modern era of hand traps being good. But DD Crow is insane. It can banish a dark, so your opponent doesn't have a Dark Armed Dragon online. It can banish a Lightsworn name, so they don't have Judgment Dragon online. It can banish a card that you're trying to bring back with either Debris Dragon. It can banish a card that Dimension Treeborn Frog as well. It can banish a card you're trying to add back off of Drill Warrior. It's huge. Like, there's so many different utility you can do with this, and you just kind of have to know that there is this needs to be like targeted hate against your opponent's strategy. So you need to know that your opponent is on something that this will be effective against. Otherwise, that's why it's not in the main board. So you wait until you find out you're against an opponent who's playing, Lightsworn or something, because against a deck like Machina or Black Wings, this card doesn't really do anything. But against Lightsworn or Frog Monarch, this card is crazy, so we want to make sure we know what our opponent's on before we start playing that. And then if I'm going second against any deck that plays Raikou or plays Mega Hamster or plays Gravekeeper Spy. I've got 3 knock in there. I think it's silly not to play this card. But again, it's only good in the side deck and only good going second when you know what your opponent's on. This card does nothing against Blackwing, really, unless they are in a situation where their setting doesn't really do anything against Machina, because they're always normal summoning a gadget. But yeah, unbelievably powerful card, but definitely a side deck choice. And it is in 3 in Edison format, surprisingly. We have Cold Wave for going second as well, especially against the more control-focused decks. Completely just shut off their back row and go ham. Absolutely broken card in this format, and this card will never be able to come back. This card was originally printed in late 2002 in Pharaoh's Servant, and never saw play until 2010 in Edison format. And it's one of the most busted cards in this format. And it really is. That's another reason why I say that picking your back row is critical, because you need to pick something that doesn't just auto lose to Cold Wave. So this part of the side deck I'm not crazy about, but we've got 2 Light Imprisoning Mirror and 1 Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. I would like to have 2 of 2 or 3 of 1 or whatever, instead of the 2 and the 1. I think it's kind of silly, but I mean, obviously this is for Blackwings and zombie decks, and this is for Lightsworn, but it seems really silly to decide in the 1, so I would like to change this ratio, but I need more copies of the Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. We have the Royal Oppression if we need to do a grind game, and then we have the Dust Tornado if we just need more back row removal. I'm thinking about playing Trap Eater in the side deck, but it hasn't really come up yet. There hasn't been that many people. I haven't had Oppression activated on me that many times to really worry about it, or any other kind of floodgates like that I would need to get rid of with Trap Eater. But it is a card. It is a pretty decent card in this format for getting rid of cards like that. So, all right, that is going to do it for my Edison Frog Monarch deck that I play at Hawk's Nest Gaming. I'm going to probably mix it up a little bit and play something different tonight. And whatever I decide to play, I will give you guys a breakdown of that deck whenever I do. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.